My name is Cyrus Delaney. I am 31 years old. And right now the woman sitting at the head of my aunt's dining room table. The one who taught constitutional law at McGill for 22 years. The one whose name appears on the dedication page of 3 legal textbooks I own. Has just set down her wine glass, turned away from the toast my mother was giving about my brother's promotion, and is looking directly at me with an expression I recognize because I have seen it across a seminar table before. Right before someone asks a question that changes the shape of a room, she says, quietly enough that only the 4 people nearest to her can hear, "Forgive me, I have to ask. Are you the Sorcy Delaney who wrote the Greystone piece?" My mother keeps talking. She hasn't heard. She is still describing my brother's new title. His corner office on the 34th floor. The way the partners took him to dinner at Take to celebrate, and she uses the word flourishing, which is her favorite word for him, the one she reaches for the way other people reach for salt. To understand why that moment meant what it meant, I have to tell you about the mirror test. I named it that when I was 9. I didn't know I was naming anything. I just knew that every time I walked past the hallway mirror in our house in Verdun, there were 2 versions of me, the one I could see, and the one my family described to other people. I kept trying to figure out which one was real. My brother is 4 years younger than me. His name is Callum. He is charming in the effortless, expensive way that certain men are charming, the kind of charm that reads as competence, even when it is mostly confidence. He has my father's jaw and my mother's social fluency and a gift for entering rooms that I have genuinely admired and genuinely resented in roughly equal measure my entire life. I do not think my mother ever made a conscious decision to love him more. I think it happened the way water finds the easiest path, not maliciously, just inevitably. Callum was easier to narrate. His achievements had visible shapes. Promotion, salary, the car he leased, the apartment in Westmount with the exposed brick and the bottle of scotch on the shelf that cost more than my first month's rent. I went into architecture. Not the glamorous kind, not at first. I spent 4 years doing site reviews, and building code compliance, and drafting documents that would be filed and never read. And I was learning something during all of those years. But it was the kind of learning that doesn't look like anything from the outside. My mother told her book club I was doing drawings for a construction company. A family friend asked me, at my uncle's retirement party, whether I had thought about going back to school for something more stable. I had just passed my OAQ licensing exam on the first attempt. When I got my license, my mother called to congratulate me. She was genuinely happy, I could hear it. And then, inside the same breath, she said that Callum had just been shortlisted for a management position and didn't. I think that was exciting. I said yes. I drove home in silence and ate cereal for dinner, and did not tell anyone about the license for 3 weeks. That became the pattern every time I cleared something. A project completion, a design award, a feature in Canadian Architect magazine. My mother's response had a trapdoor in it. She would lift me up for exactly 1 sentence and then open the floor beneath me by pivoting to him. I kept running the mirror test from my apartment in Rosemont. Every byline, every award, every built project. None of it moved my photo forward. When I was 27, I was brought onto the Greystone project. It was a community housing development in Hochelaga. 62 units, mixed income, built on a remediated industrial site that had been sitting vacant for 11 years. The city had tried twice before to get something built there and failed both times. The challenge was not just the design, it was the contamination history, the community trust deficit, the heritage overlay on the adjacent streetscape, and a budget that required creative structural decisions that most firms would have walked away from. I did not walk away. I spent 14 months on that project. I ran the community consultation sessions myself. I went to 6 neighborhood association meetings where people were angry and skeptical and had every right to be. And I sat with that anger instead of deflecting it, and I came back with a design that responded to what those residents actually said they needed, not what we assumed they needed. The building opened in October. It was full within 3 weeks. The piece I wrote about the process, about the community consultation methodology, about the structural decisions, about what ethical urban housing actually requires, ran in a national architectural journal. It was reprinted. It was cited in a City of Montreal Planning Committee report. It was, by every external measure I know how to apply, the most significant thing I had done in my professional life. My mother's response. "That's lovely, say. Your brother's firm is doing a new office tower downtown, did you hear? 40 stories? He says the partners have been asking his opinion on the design choices. Callum's firm does corporate finance. I need you to understand that I do not blame my brother for any of this. Callum has never once, to my face, diminished what I do. He has come to 2 of my project openings. He brought wine. He stood in the space and looked at it seriously and said, 'You did this?' In a way that meant it. The problem was never him. The problem was the story our mother told about us, the ratio she kept adjusting, the way she distributed visibility the way some parents distribute inheritance. Not equally. and not randomly, but according to a logic only she fully understood. She told her friends I was in construction. She said it with a vague, softening gesture, like the topic required gentling. When my aunt, her own sister, asked why I wasn't at a family dinner, and my mother said I was working on a project, she added, "So Say keeps very irregular hours. It's just how that world is." As if I were a bartender. As if irregular hours were a symptom of an unstable life, rather than evidence of a person doing serious work. I know because my aunt told me later, apologetically, over coffee, that she had believed my mother for years. "I thought you were having a hard time finding your footing," she said. That's the impression I had. I had just been nominated for a Prix de l'Oq. The dinner where it all broke open was supposed to be a celebration. Callum had been named a junior partner at his firm. This is genuinely impressive. I want to be clear. I was happy for him. I called him the day I found out and told him I was proud of him and meant every word. The dinner was at my aunt's house in Outremont. The good china, the cloth napkins, the kind of gathering that requires a dress code without anyone stating one. The guest list included my aunt and her husband, my parents, my brother and his girlfriend, and Dr. Emmeline Tremblay-Watts. Dr. Tremblay-Watts had taught at McGill Law for over 2 decades before retiring to consult on urban policy and sit on several provincial advisory boards, including one focused on affordable housing development. She was my aunt's closest friend from graduate school and, as I would learn over the course of that dinner, she had been following the Greystone project for over a year. My mother introduced me at the door. "This is Say. She does drafting work, design things, very behind the scenes." Dr. Tremblay-Watts took my hand, something moved across her face. My mother steered her toward the living room. Dinner was my mother's choreography. She poured the wine and narrated Callum's trajectory, the way a sports commentator narrates a highlight reel. The partnership track, the salary restructuring, the business travel to Toronto and Calgary, the way the senior partners had started including him in client dinners. She was radiant doing it. This was the story she had been practicing for years, and tonight, the audience included someone important, and she was not going to waste the material. Every time a question drifted my direction, she redirected it. My aunt asked what I was working on. My mother said, "Oh, Say always has something on the go, don't you? Pass the bread, sweetheart." Callum's girlfriend asked about the neighborhood I lived in. My mother said, "Rosemont, it's very artsy, lots of young people. Sears has always liked that kind of environment." She said artsy, the way people say charming about an apartment with no natural light. Dr. Tremblay-Watts asked me directly, across the table, what kind of architecture I did. I had 3 words out of my mouth before my mother said, "She's quite modest, she doesn't like to talk about herself," and laughed, and the moment closed. I picked up my wine glass and looked at the tablecloth, and made the calculation I had been making my whole life. Swallow it, smile, let the room move on. Then Dr. Tremblay-Watts set her fork down. She didn't make a production of it. She simply set it down, folded her hands, and waited until the conversation reached a natural pause. Then she looked at me. Not at my mother, not at the table, at me, and said, "I have to ask, are you the Say Delaney who wrote the Greystone piece?" My mother laughed. A bright, confused laugh. "The Greystone piece?" Dr. Tremblay-Watts did not look at her. "Your article on the Greystone development was included in the reading package for the Provincial Housing Advisory Board I sit on. I have been citing your community consultation methodology in every presentation I've given this year. I've been trying to find out who you were." The table went quiet in the specific way that tables go quiet when the floor plan of a room has just been revised without warning. My mother said, "Well, that's Say does a lot of little things here and there." Dr. Tremblay-Watts turned toward her, not unkindly, not with drama, with the precise, patient attention of someone who has spent decades in rooms where language matters and imprecision has consequences. "The Greystone methodology is not a little thing. The City Planning Committee cited it in their revised framework for remediated site development. It has materially affected how affordable housing projects are approved in this province. I would not describe that as a little thing." My aunt set her wine glass down. She looked at my mother. "You told me Say was doing drafting work." My mother straightened her napkin. "I didn't want to make it into a hole. She doesn't like the attention." "That's not true," I said. "It came out quietly. I hadn't planned it. But it came out, and it sat there in the middle of the table, and I left it there. I don't avoid attention. I was just never given a sentence to speak in before something else came up." My mother's eyes filled. She has a way of crying that looks like hurt but functions like armor. I have watched it work on people my entire life. I was only trying to keep things balanced. Callum had a big night. I didn't want everything to become about Say. My aunt said very carefully, "But it was never about Say, not once, not in the last 10 years that I can remember." Callum had been quiet through all of this. He is not a confrontational person. He processes things slowly and privately, but I watched something happen on his face during my aunt's sentence, a kind of recalibration, a going back through something in real time. He said, Mum, did you tell Priya's family that Sawarse had? What was it? That she'd been going through some professional instability? Priya is his girlfriend. She was sitting right there. Priya said quietly. She did say something like that. She said you'd had some difficulty settling into your field. Callum looked at my mother. Why would you say that? My mother pressed her napkin against her mouth. I was just. People ask questions, and I never know how to explain what Sawarse does, and it's easier to say, I didn't mean. You've never asked me to explain it to you, I said. In 14 years, you've never once asked me to walk you through a project. You've been to one opening. One. And you left before the speeches because you had something for Callum the next morning. She flinched. My father, who had been as present as the centerpiece all evening, looked up from his plate. He is a quiet man, my father. He has spent 40 years in a marriage where someone else manages the narrative. And I think some part of him had forgotten he was allowed to have one. He looked at my mother and said, in a voice I did not recognize as his, She's right, Diane. You've done this his whole life. You have 2 children. Dr. Tremblay-Watts reached into her jacket. She wrote something on a card, her number, an email, and slid it across the table to me. I chair a panel in the spring on community-led housing development. I would very much like you to present, if you're willing. She looked at me steadily. Your work speaks for itself. It has been speaking for itself in rooms you didn't know about. Callum looked at Priya for a long moment. Then at me. I didn't know she said that to your family, he said. About the instability. I want you to know I didn't know. I know, I said. I know you didn't. I should have paid more attention, he said. I knew things were uneven. I didn't push on it. He didn't try to make it smaller than it was. I have thought about that since I stood up. I folded my napkin. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. The wool one I'd bought secondhand at a shop on Saint Denis. And had had dry cleaned specifically for tonight. Though I hadn't consciously understood why until that moment. It was the coat I'd been wearing. The afternoon the Greystone building got its occupancy permit, and I stood on the sidewalk outside and looked up at it and knew, in the specific wordless way you know things that matter, that I had done something real. I turned to my mother. I love you, I said, and I have spent most of my adult life trying to make myself fit into the amount of space you left for me. I'm done doing that. If you want a relationship with me, I need you to be curious about who I actually am. Not who's easier to explain at a dinner party. She didn't say anything. Her eyes were still wet. My father nodded once, slowly, like he was agreeing with something he should have said years ago. I left without waiting for anyone to follow me out. There were 7 messages by morning. My mother, twice. One hurt, one conciliatory, both still somewhat about her. My aunt, who said she was sorry she hadn't pushed harder on the story she'd been given about me for years. Callum at midnight. I've been thinking, I don't have a clean version of this, but I should have asked more questions. I'm sorry I didn't. Priya, at 6:40 in the morning. For what it's worth. Callum talked about you for 3 hours last night. He's really proud of you. I think he's also ashamed he didn't say that out loud more. And a number I didn't have saved. Dr. Tremblay-Watts. The spring panel is real and I mean it. Also, if you ever want to talk about what it takes to keep building serious work without institutional backing, I know something about that. Coffee, whenever you're ready. We met 5 weeks later at a cafe in the Plateau. She ordered a café au lait and spoke about her first decade at McGill with a frankness that surprised me. The ways she'd been dismissed, the colleagues who'd cited her work without crediting her. The slow process of building a record that was too substantial to keep being set aside. The institution eventually caught up, she said. That's not comfort. It took a long time, and it cost things. But the work was always real, whether or not anyone in your house was reading it. She asked me what I called what my mother had done. I said, the mirror test. Where you keep looking to see if the version of you that you know matches the one they're showing everyone else. She was quiet for a moment. And does it? Now? I thought about the dining room in Outremont. The moment the room went quiet, the card sliding across the tablecloth. It's starting to, I said. Callum and I had lunch in November. Just the 2 of us at a Portuguese place on Rachel that we'd been meaning to try for 2 years. It was the first time in I don't know how long that we talked for 3 hours without my mother being the gravitational center of the conversation. He said, I think I understood something was off. I just didn't know how to name it without it becoming a whole thing. It was always a whole thing, I said. You just weren't in the middle of it. He didn't argue. He ate his chicken and looked out at the street. She talks about you differently now, you know, after that dinner. I've heard her describe your work twice and both times she got it right. She said urban housing and award nominated, and she didn't follow it with anything about me. I didn't know what to do with that. I sat with it for a while. My mother called on a Tuesday in December. She didn't have a reason, no occasion, she just called. She said, I've been trying to think about how to say this without it coming out the way it always comes out. A pause. I don't think I knew how to be proud of you in a way you could see. I told myself I was protecting the peace, the balance, but I was managing the story. And you were the part of the story I didn't know how to tell, so I told a smaller version of it, and I kept telling it until I think I half believed it. She was quiet. That's not who you are. I know that now. I think I knew it before and I didn't know how to sit inside that knowing. You do things I don't have language for, and instead of learning the language, I just said less. It was not a perfect apology. It did not account for everything, but it was a Tuesday afternoon, and she had called without a reason, and she had said the thing that was true, and that was more than I had expected to get. If you want to try again, I said, I need you to ask questions, even if you don't understand the answers yet. She said she would try. I believed her enough to give her the chance. I drove to Verdun on a Saturday in January. No occasion, just a Saturday. The house smelled the same as it always has, my mother's particular combination of coffee, and the lavender sachets she keeps in every closet, the slightly damp warmth of an older house in winter. My father was watching a hockey game with the sound almost off, the way he watches everything, as if full volume might commit him to something. I walked past the sideboard in the front hall. It's where my mother keeps framed photos, a rotating gallery that I have been monitoring, consciously and unconsciously, for 20 years. My architecture's school graduation photo was at the front, not off to the side, not behind the candlestick she inherited from her own mother. In the front, slightly crooked, like it had been placed there recently and with some deliberateness, by someone who was still figuring out the new arrangement. Next to it, a printout of the Canadian architect feature, folded to show my photo and the headline, tucked into a frame that usually held a generic print she'd bought at a home goods store. I stood there for a long time. Then my mother came out of the kitchen, saw me looking, and didn't apologize and didn't explain. She just said, "Supper's at 6, I made tourtière." And then, as she turned back toward the kitchen, almost as an afterthought, I looked up Greystone on the city planning website. They listed you as lead architect. I didn't know it said that. She didn't redirect, she didn't balance it with something about Callum. She went back to her kitchen. I sat down next to my father and watched the last period of the hockey game. The Habs were losing, which is its own kind of constant. He handed me the bowl of chips without looking away from the screen and said, "She printed out 3 of your articles. They're in the kitchen drawer." I didn't say anything. Neither did he. We watched the game. It wasn't a fixed family, it wasn't the end of the work. I know that. There are years of accumulated silence that don't disappear because someone frames a magazine feature. My mother will have setbacks. There will be dinners where she defaults to the old ratio without meaning to, and I will have to decide each time whether I'm willing to name it or let it go. I don't have a clean answer for that. I don't think there is one, but the photo was in the front, and if you have ever walked into a room where someone else had already decided, before you arrived, how much space you were allowed to take up. Hear this. The mirror test never really ends. You don't one day look in the hallway mirror and see a perfect match one between who you are and who they've told people you are. What changes is what you do when they don't match, whether you adjust yourself to fit the smaller version, or whether you keep being the real one until the people around you have to update the story they're telling. The night that Professor looked across the table and asked whether I was the person who had done that work, I thought saying yes might cost me the version of my family I was used to. What it cost me was the version of myself I'd been performing for them. That's not a bad trade. And if you are somewhere right now where the price of belonging is making yourself smaller than you actually are, the person who needs to hear that you're done with that price isn't them. It's you.